Oh, how I wish Jesus would make up his mind. You saw the text, right? I did not come to bring peace, I came to bring peace. What, are we going to have to take a vote on which he means? We'll see if we want to. I had lunch yesterday with an old good friend of mine, a gentleman whose wardrobe is spectacular. He's European in his background and gets all his clothes in the finest shops of Europe. And I know him well enough because he has 5 outfits for the winter and 5 for the summer, and each one is increasingly good looking. They fit well, they were made to last. Well, sure enough, he showed up at lunch with a big tear in one of his shirts. It didn't look good. And I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, but it was kind of obvious that there was a big tear in his shirt. And so I said, boy, you must really like that shirt. And he said, I really do. I love this shirt, and I'm going to wear it till it falls off me. So my title today is Democracy in Tatters. It's ripped, like my friend's shirt. For many of us, it's ripped very close to the heart. It's not going to take me long to convince you that democracy is in tatters. All I have to do is say Congress, or global capitalism, or Ferguson, or the Koch brothers, and all that money buying all those votes. Or remind you that 95% of all economic gains that have been made since the Great Recession have gone to 1%, the top 1%. Great Recession's not over. Stock market's doing okay. 1%'s doing great, but 99% are still not capable of being democratic citizens. So distorted is the nature of wealth. Or I could remind you that the 400 richest Americans have as much wealth as all 41 million African Americans. And we wonder why there are rebellions in places like Ferguson. When income inequality expands, democracy diminishes. It just does. It's easy to convince people of all stripes, by the way, that democracy is in tatters and looks like a beautiful shirt with a big rip in it, one close to the heart. We agree about that. It's almost the only thing Americans do agree about. And you might want to now decide not to agree with everything I'm going to say, because I'm going to turn here. You might even want to fuss with me about what I'm going to say. Do you think that democracy can ever produce economic justice? Do you believe that it could produce economic justice? Could I get a movement that said nobody can make more than 10 times what anybody else makes, right? You want the president to do that, or Congress to do that, or the Senate to do that, or the Supreme Court to do that? Could democracy ever produce the kind of economic justice that we do covet? Wouldn't it be better if you really wanted economic justice to go find yourself a king or a queen, or a tyrant, to redistribute wealth and to bring people back again to something like democracy? That's how democracy was born. It was born in a rising tide that did lift all boats, or more boats than had been lifted before. Or more troubling, can we ever stop or reverse climate change with democracy? How would we do that? Don't we need a tyrant to stop fossil fuel emissions yesterday? And how are we going to get that tyrant? Especially when a lot of people don't really think there's a problem to begin with? Can all of the things that many of us want ever happen democratically when not all of us want them? Or take a simpler example. Take Judson Memorial Church. We're in a capital campaign to keep this building afloat, and we all agree that we have to do that. But we also know that as a congregation, we no longer own ourselves. The corporate charter says we do, but our budget is about $1 million, give or take, and $700,000 of that comes from rentals, foundations, and outsiders, and $300,000 comes from us, members, and so we don't really own the building. And when you don't really own something, it's very hard to be democratic, right? Because I just made the case about income inequality. Here it comes again. By the way, I have given the building a nickname. I've decided she needs a nickname, and if others want to have another nickname, that's great. But mine is Grazie Prego. Now, it comes right out of being in Italy, where every time you say grazie, somebody says prego. So I've decided that she is Grazie Prego. And that way I can say to her, grazie, and she says prego. So I say thank you, and she says you're welcome. She does talk. She does live. She breathes, and she bends. There's so much soul energy in this place sometimes that you just don't know what you're going to do, standing here or there, and I could name all the witnesses, but my nicknamed building actually does most of the ministry around here. She does it. The rest of us just kind of join along. And to take the democratic question a little bit further, we do have a democratic governance here, very much so. We believe in it. It's a core theological notion for us, the priesthood of all believers, owning our space, not having any one person have too much power or give too much money or be in charge of too much. We love that. We are fervent about that. And I think it's gospel. I think it's what God wants. I think it's good. And when your building does 70% of the ministry and your congregation does 30% of it, it gets a little interesting about who is in charge. Often, there's a very healthy tension around here, as there should be in anything democratic. You see where I'm going. About this healthy tension here for us is about how to balance staff and volunteers, congregational members and building users. What's going to be fun in the next year is to figure out how to minister, some would say administer, but I would say minister, to these tensions. Volunteers, of course, want more control and more authority, that which they have by our Constitution, and they also want more staffing, and I hope you all see how vital that tension can become. Absolutely vital, and we will not agree about how to do it. So back to democracy. It may have a rip in its shirt. It may not be the best system to achieve all the kinds of changes we need yesterday, like sustainability, or fossil fuel restrictions, or health care for all. It may even be fatal to these issues. It may even get in the way of Grazie Prego doing her work here among us. What I want to do now is to tell you what Jesus says about these matters. He says a lot, actually. You heard the two texts about peace. I have come to bring you conflict, which I would interpret as I've come to bring you democracy. And the other text is I've come to bring you peace. I have come to bring you democracy. They both are found by way of getting better at being democratic citizens, and Sarah's testimony is so perfect. She wants to up her executive function. Did you hear that? up her executive function and stop having everybody tell her what she thinks. The only way democracy can survive at Judson or in the United States of America is for everybody to up their executive function. What is it? It's when you act from the brain part of you that has been tutored to connect and not to be afraid of conflict, not to fear somebody saying, oh, you're wrong about that. You say, thank you very much. And then you engage with each other. Executive function is defined in 3 ways. You have intellectual flexibility. That means you've made some change sometime in the last year in behavior or thinking. Executive function means that you have the ability to change your mind. If you haven't made any changes in the last year, your executive function is probably not functioning. Secondly, it means that you have inhibitory control. You know when to open your mouth and when to keep it shut. On behalf of what? On behalf of the whole, on behalf of the system. Executive function also has great memory. It knows who to trust and who not to trust. It knows who others trust and who others have figured out not to trust. It knows who is going to be a person whose spirit bears fruit and who are the people whose spirits will distort and divide and get people in trouble. So we need more executive function according to the social psychologists. I would call it something else spiritually. I would call it composure. The ability to be at peace internally. The capacity to worship something larger than what other people say about you. Being an expert at conflict. Not believing that when somebody else says, I don't like you, or I don't like your thought, or I don't think you're going the right direction, that you don't think that's an offense. You think, how are we going to build that diversity so that we can, grazie prego, or deal with climate change, or deal with income inequality? People who have executive function have an agenda. Isn't it terrible how that word, she has an agenda, has come to mean she's trying to manipulate me? Isn't executive function the capacity to have an agenda, to know what you want, and to be able to say it without insisting that you get it? Very different. I want, I may not get, but I can say what I want. That is executive function, that is composure, that is inner peace, that is capable of outer conflict, because it knows outer conflict is going to democratically lead back to peace. There's an awful lot to say about democracy, and today I have to speak about one more subject that is related. I went back and forth about this. It's been astonishing to me how many of you have been affected by the death of Robin Williams. Some more deeply than others, but doesn't it say something about America that every news broadcast now tells us that 1/3 of us are mentally ill or addicted? What's going on with democracy? That so many people are mentally ill, in quotations, or addicted? What's going on that 1 out of 3 people, and I know that we're sitting together today, and I know I'm talking about us here. What does it mean that 1 out of 3 of us in the richest, freest country in the world are mentally ill or addicted? What does it mean that one of our best comedians at age 63 just couldn't go on? What does it do to our hope in each other or our hope for ourselves? You see, it doesn't really matter so much, the big stuff about democracy. The way it matters is when individual humans find a way to be free and connected and maximal and optimal and alive and mature and composed. That is the promise of God to us. And somehow we're missing that. I can't recommend highly enough Annie Lamott's posting about Robin Williams. It'll be in the text of this sermon. You can get it, or you can just get it online. Did you know she grew up in the same town as he did? They were neighbors. And she saw early how manic and interesting and funny he was. Just a few of her words. Gravity yanks all of us down, even a man as stunning in every way as Robin. And we need a lot of help getting back up. And even with our battered, banged-up toolboxes and aching backs, we can help each other get up. Even when for them to do so seems impossible, or at least beyond imagining. Or if it can't be done, we can sit with them on the ground in the abyss in solidarity. You know, I always say that laughter is carbonated holiness. Well, Robin was just that. Carbonated holiness. I think she's stealing a line from Martin Luther, who said that you can tell how much faith a person has by how much they laugh. So, we who do have some faith, we can laugh our way to democracy, believe it or not. We can have fun disagreeing. We can learn to enjoy conflict. We can learn to anticipate it, and we can be the people who aren't afraid of it. Because when you shut down, democracy is not possible. When you open up, oh my, so possible to carbonate with holiness. Amen.